so super nervous. Let me know, if anybody pops in here, can someone let me know, can you hear me? This is going to be my first full-length official live, and this is the first time going live with headphones, earbuds in, so can someone, I'm going to take a few minutes here to first get myself situated, make sure that there's plenty of room, and if someone, like I said, can someone let me know, can you guys hear me? Like, I have earbuds in and I've not done that, so can you guys hear me at all? How is the sound quality? It would be great if someone could let me know. Can you hear me or not? Super, super nervous. I've never done anything like this before. I do my live book talks in my book group once in a while, but like that's to a really small group of people who I mostly know. So I've never gone live for the general public before, so I am super nervous right now. Because this is going to be a live video of the book reading, and then when the video is done and I save it to my device, I'm going to upload it to YouTube for those who don't have TikTok or those who missed it. And it's going to be posted to my Literate AF group on Facebook. So, like I said, if somebody who's in could let me know, can you guys hear me? Can you hear me? I've never had earbuds in, so I have no idea. If someone could let me know how the sound quality is, and like if anyone has any criticisms, let me know right away. Okay, good, awesome, thank you so much. Staying above water. Oh, I like your name. I like your name. It's very Avril Lavigne, which that's just a social an association that I make. I love her song, Head Above Water. But okay, so you guys can hear me, then I should stop babbling and stop being nervous and just get down to it. I apologize in advance for any background noise, sounds, and especially giggling. My young toddler son. Cool. Welcome to your new account. But my toddler son is literally just a few feet away laying on the couch. He's supposed to be having quiet time right now. So I'm trying to take advantage of that. But if he... I'm a mom and wife first, so there might be an interruption or some extra background noise, so for that I apologize. So, let me see here. Okay, so today is going to be the first of a new series I'm doing. I'm going to start live on TikTok and then, like I said, upload the videos after they've been downloaded to my YouTube. I'm going to be reading aloud from Juniper by Monica Furlong. This started as an idea in my Literate AF group, and I've talked to now several people on several platforms about it, that, there's a lot of people who would love to read certain books that are out of print, had a short run to begin with, weren't very popular, so there's, not very many left, or didn't get very many printed, or it's so old there's not a lot of copies left anyway. And like I said, this started in my Literate AF group, which is a book group that I'm a moderator for on Facebook. And it's for all things book related. We're not like a book club. We don't like read together or anything. It's just a place to talk about books. And it has kind of grown from there. So I lost my train of thought because I'm nervous. So what I'm going to do is, we're starting with this book because this is one of my favorite books from when I was a kid. So it's a young adult book. But this is one of my favorite books when I was a teenager, preteen. And when I was talking about it for my book group, it took me like 2.5 months, 3 months. A lot of help from some friends who were all searching far and wide, and a lot of complaints into my local library to finally find a copy of this book and its sequel, because the author has unfortunately died some time ago, and there weren't very many copies of it to begin with. So this is actually a really hard book to get a hold of. I managed it though with some help, so thank you to the people who helped me if you end up seeing this. So it's a really short book, and it's the first part of a 3-part series. Now chronologically, I believe the second book came out first, and then this book, which is the prequel, and then the third book many years later. But we will be reading them in order of like how they should go storyline wise. So this book takes place in the story before the other two. So we're going to read this one first, even though technically I think it was published second. But I like the way they build together anyway. So we're going to start with this book. So this is Juniper by Monica Furlong. I apologize. I realize that the camera turns it around and it is backwards, but you can extrapolate. So today we are going to be reading chapters 1 through 3 of this, and then I haven't decided yet whether I'm going to do weekly or bi-weekly. It might be more kind of as my life allows. But I will be reading 1 through 3 tonight, and then another day I will post, 4 through whatever. It kind of depends on the length of the chapters, because some of these chapters are super long, some are super short. Okay, so today we are reading chapters 1 through 3. Grab your... I don't know what just happened. Sorry. Something just popped up. I don't know what it was. Okay. It's telling me to swipe. Okay, got it. Oh, it's trying to teach me how to do a live in the middle of my live. That's kind of ganky. Okay. So we're gonna get right down to it. So today we're starting with chapter 1. So for those who don't know, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna show you the cover, and I'm gonna read the back of it. You're gonna see a little blurb, and then I'll start with chapter 1. So this is Juniper. The only child of King of Cornwall, Juniper enjoys the easy life of a medieval princess. Still, something compels her to leave the palace to study with her godmother, Uni, a harsh but wise woman who teaches the girl about herbs, healing, and the magic within nature. As her training comes to an end, Juniper discovers that her power-hungry aunt is using black magic in an attempt to seize the throne. Armed only with her new, untested powers, Juniper must find a way to stop her before the kingdom itself is destroyed. Alright. This is my first time opening this copy. Alright. Chapter 1. The night I was born, according to my nurse, Erith, was a night of black frost and dense darkness in a bitter January. White owls, who lived in some nearby trees, never stopped hooting and flying around the palace, or so the story goes. No one slept a wink. Erith thought it was a sign that I was a remarkable child, and by the time I was old enough to hear the story, I liked to believe her. Remarkable or not, I was bathed and oiled and bandaged, as all babies are, and then they dressed me in a little shift and wrapped me in a rabbit skin to keep me warm. My mother and father showed their first baby to the elders, and the elder statesmen, as was custom, My mother and father showed their first baby to the elder statesmen, as was custom, and then Erith cuddled me all night so that, as she said, I would not feel strange in this new country I had come to. In my earliest memory, I was toddling around on the big grassy enclosure at the center of the palace. Many grown-ups were walking about, men mostly, holding strange forked twigs in their hands. They moved slowly, eyes fixed on the ground, and they did not notice me or talk to me as they usually did. Because I was bored and wanted to copy them, I picked up a forked twig that someone had dropped and began to move toward the middle of the grass. Suddenly I screamed and screamed, so wildly and in such terror that everyone stopped and looked at me. What had happened was that the twig in my hand had turned into a snake. Well, it hadn't really. It was just a little twig, but while I had held it, all of a sudden it had started moving and wriggling in the most horrible way. My father came over to me. "What happened?" he asked. "It turned into a snake," I said, knowing that they would all laugh at me because there it was, just being a stick. "It's all right," he said. "It wasn't really a snake. Would you do it again to show us?" So, rather nervously, but wanting to please, I picked up the twig again by its two handles, and almost at once it began to jerk downward as if it had a life of its own, and once again I dropped it with a yell. I thought my father would be cross with me, but he picked me up in his arms with a laugh. "Well done, little girl. You found us another supply of water. We thought there was one here somewhere, but no one could ever find it. I suppose I should mention that my father was Regulus, that is, a small chieftain or king in Cornwall, and we lived at Castle Dor in the wooden palace that he had built on a high grassy place, the site of an ancient fort. There was a house around a courtyard where my mother and father and I lived, a house for the astrologers, and another for the bards, an armory, a bakery, quarters for the knights and elders, and a big hall where my father dined with them every evening. The house stood in the hills with a long view of farms and other hills, and the air sparkled with that special radiance of Cornish light. My mother, Erlaine, was a tall, graceful woman who was very clever. She could read and write and had learned mathematics and poetry. She could sing beautifully to the harp, and it was she, I heard tell, who brought the bards to our house, and with them a very different atmosphere from the days when my father had lived alone with his knights. She taught him to read and write. She taught him to read and write, and gradually, warrior though he was, he began to enjoy learning as much as she did. Later on, as a result, he wanted me to have the sort of good education that girls often do not have, even now. I should tell you that whenever a child was born to a knight or elder among my people, the astrologers studied the heavens and its charts to work out the portents for the child's life. Then they wrote some words, almost a sort of poem, to help the child remember the main points, and this was inscribed in a tiny writing on parchment and put into a little horn case. That was worn on a leather thong around the neck. Later on, when I was older and had learned to read, I liked to take the parchment out and read the words through, just to remind myself. Sorry. Okay. It went like this. Name for the strong and twisting tree of medicine when she finds the way. By earth, air, water, fire, then will she mend what is broken. The dark teacher will correct her, the fair one will protect her, the strong man will love her, and all may be well. It didn't make much sense to me, because, after all, I was not named after a tree, but was called by the good Cornish name of Nanak. The rest of the words seemed just as puzzling. Other early memories are of a huge chamber at the wooden palace, with a fire leaping and flickering in the hearth. I had a big bed, and Aerith had a little one in the corner, but because I felt lonely in my big bed, I often jumped out of it and climbed in with Aerith. Aerith was young and pretty, with red hair and lots of freckles. I used to count them to tease her. Sometimes I awoke her to make her tell me a story or sing me one of her Irish songs. I was quite bossy with Aerith. I behaved like a little princess who expects the servants to do as she tells them. Refusing to get dressed or have a bath or eat my dinner or whatever it was she had to get me to do. Once or twice she threatened to tell my father about my bad behavior, but she never did. Sometimes my father would appear in my rooms in the evening, just at the time I should have been going to bed, and tell Aerith to dress me in my prettiest gown. I had some beautiful clothes made from pieces of gold and silver material, like liquid flame, left over from my mother's gowns. I was very proud of myself in them. I had earrings and bracelets made of silver or set with gems, and on special occasions Aerith hung jewels in my long black hair. Aerith would put my little squirrel-skin slippers on me and comb my hair. And then I would walk with my father in the procession to the great hall. He would sit me on his lap and feed me tidbits from his plate. After dinner, I would be passed around on the knees of the knights, and they would all tease me and play with me. Once or twice I stood on a table and sang one of the songs my mother or Aerith had taught me. I enjoyed being spoiled, but I was disappointed that my mother did not have another baby, who could have been a playmate for me. Only much later did I realize that my parents also wanted more children. But soon I acquired a new playmate, whom I will tell you about later. And also, Aerith let me play with the children of some of the knights and elders. We played marvelous games. The old fort on which the palace had been built was surrounded by enormous ditches and ramparts, constructed in a maze to make it hard for enemies to find the way in. We raced one another around the ditches, slid down the ramparts on wooden sleds, learned the mazes by heart, and had wonderful games of hide-and-seek there. Once, when we were playing, a thin, dark-skinned woman approached the entrance to the maze that led to the palace. She had strange black eyes, high color in her cheeks, and a strong, determined gait. She was dressed in worn black clothes, not much better than rags, really, and she did not wear the head covering that all the grown women except beggars wore. Her black hair hung straight down her back, as if she were a child. She wore boots so old that part of her foot showed through one of them. Her whole appearance offended me. "What do you want here?" I asked bossily. "I have business with Marcus." I've never had to say most of these names out loud. I apologize. "I have business with Marcus Kunamoras," she said, sweeping me aside and moving into the maze. "He won't see you," I shouted scornfully to her back, after which we children climbed onto the ramparts for the pleasure of seeing her lose her way in the maze. We had often enjoyed seeing strangers turn repeatedly up the blind alleys until they were forced to ask our help and even to bribe us with a coin. The thin woman did not lose her way, but moved skillfully toward the entrance. The guard must have let her through, because a few moments later we could see her making her way toward my father's rooms. "Who was that woman who came to see you?" I asked him that evening. "The one in dreadful clothes."
Who's that woman?
"That was Uni," he said, and he was silent, although he and my mother exchanged glances. I wanted to ask who she was and what she had come for, but he always discouraged me from asking about things that were not my business, so that I did not quite dare. And that was the last I was to hear of Uni for some time. It was soon after this that I found a tiny baby owl out in the fields, and since he appeared to have lost his mother and was in a sad, bedraggled condition, I insisted on taking him home. Aerith kept saying that my parents would not allow me to keep him, but I hid him in a small room off my sleeping chamber, and only she ever knew. Aerith was sure that I would not bother to feed him, but I used to beg mice that the cook had caught in her traps, and other little pieces of meat, and the baby owl seemed quite content. His white feathers looked clean now, especially when he fluffed himself out. I loved to take him on my hand and stare into his blank amber eyes. Sometimes he sat on my shoulder, but often he liked to perch for hours on a shelf over the hearth, dozing in the dim winter light. Later he took little flights around the room, moving beautifully with his wide wings. I called him Moon. Sorry, dry throat problems. Winter in the north. As I grew older, I'm sorry to say that I became ruder to Aerith. She was often quite worn out from the effort of getting me to rise, wash, and dress, even though it was she who did the work of washing and dressing me. I could never do anything to look after myself in those days. When we went out, I was always wanting to go farther than was permitted, or to do things that Aerith thought were dangerous. Walking down the ice ponds, when it was still too thin, jumping over the autumn bonfires that the farm people built at harvest time, climbing high into trees, swinging from one branch to another and refusing to calm down. Aerith would stand, imploring me to do as I was told, torn between her love and care for me and her fear of heights or water or fire. In those days, I seemed to be afraid of nothing. I was tormenting Aerith like this one day. I had gone into the stable where my father's stallion was kept, a great black animal who had lamed a groom and whose kick could probably have killed me. I moved closer and closer to it, determined to stroke it and give it an apple, while Aerith, half crying, beseeched me to return to her. I think I knew that I was being stupid, but somehow Aerith's pleas drove me on to misbehave. Suddenly, to my amazement, I felt myself seized by the neck and shoulders and marched out of the stable by someone behind me whom I could not see. As soon as I was able, I turned furiously and was astonished to see it was the woman Uni, still as shabby as ever, gazing at me with blazing eyes. "Juniper," she said. We stood and stared at each other for a few moments, both of us angry. And then, annoyed that she was rebuking me for distressing Aerith, I mumbled, "It's not your business anyway." Uni did not reply to this, but gave me a little push in the direction away from the stable, and herself turned around and walked off. Glancing at Aerith, I saw that she looked sickeningly smug. "There," she said, "you've annoyed your godmother." I was so surprised at this that I forgot about her smug look. My godmother? Uni? My godmother? Why would someone like Uni be my godmother? "That was your mother's choice," she said. "Not that your father disagreed." And she closed her lips very firmly in a way that she often had when I talked about things that made her uneasy. So naturally, I asked my mother, Elaine, at the first opportunity, "Is Uni my godmother?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because she is wise, and we needed her." "Why?" "Can't tell you now." "I don't like her. She looks like a beggar woman." My mother did not answer. "And she called me Juniper. Why is that?" My mother laughed with pleasure. "It was a special name she had for you, your secret name. She whispered it in your ear when you were a baby. Later she told me and said that the secret name was who you really are." All of this seemed very peculiar to me, although not so peculiar as my parents asking this strange woman to be my godmother in the first place. I went out and walked in the ditch between the ramparts to think, a place I often walked when I wanted peace and quiet. There, between the grassy walls, under a gray spring sky, I tried out the name for sound and meaning. Juniper. Juniper. Juniper! As I spoke it, an extraordinary sense of conviction seized me, as if I had moved and saw the world more clearly and freshly from this new place. "Juniper!" I said it more loudly, and finally I shouted it as hard as I could. The sentry's face looked reproachfully over the top of the ramparts. "Now then," he said kindly, meaning that making loud noises was worrying to a man whose job was to look out for sudden attacks by her enemies. But I had finished. I knew that Uni, however odd, was right, and that Juniper was my proper name. Later on, I had another question for my mother. "Where does Uni live?" "She's an outlander." That meant she lived in the country beyond the farms that were under my father's special protection, in a place where she was always in danger of marauders and brigands. Doesn't that frighten her? Not Uni. I don't believe she's ever afraid. So that's the end of chapter 1. I believe I saw a button to pause the live. Okay, I apologize. Alright, let's see. There we go. I apologize. The mother's work is never done. Alright, so that was the end of chapter 1. We are going to move on to chapter 2. Chapter 2 is slightly shorter, I believe. I think so, yeah. Alright, so Juniper, chapter 2. There was only one person at the court whom I disliked, and who I felt disliked me in return. My Aunt Meerut. She was my father's older sister. All his life he had loved and admired her, so that when I said I did not like her, he would sharply tell me not to be silly. When I was about 4, Meerut's husband died in mysterious circumstances. My father had built a house for her in the wooden palace, and she and her son, Gamal, who was about my age, came to live with us. Unlike my father, who had wonderful ruddy hair and powerful blue eyes, Meerut had sandy hair and eyes like cold, pale sapphires that I felt watched me critically from behind the curtain of her white lashes. Gamal, on the other hand, was a handsome, blond-haired little boy, not at all like his mother. At once he became a brother to me. We played, slept, and ate together, a lot of the time. But as far as we possibly could, we kept out of Meerut's way. Meerut, who my father used to say jokingly would have made a wonderful soldier, was determined that Gamal grow up strong and fearless, and almost from his infancy she had little suits of armor and small wooden swords made for him, and had him training and fighting and wrestling and archery at an age when most little boys were playing marbles or looking for birds' eggs. She made him wear very few clothes in the winter so that he would become tough. It had this effect of giving him endless colds. and she forced him to sleep on the hard floor with few blankets and to eat the sort of diet soldiers ate. It was a hard life. Gamal was very loyal to his mother, and hardly ever complained, but as a result of these hardships, he spent a lot of time getting warm at the fire in my apartment, wearing a rough coat Erin stitched for him out of a blanket, eating any spare food we had, and occasionally dozing off to sleep in corners. In spite of his mother's treatment, he was a cheerful, uncomplaining boy who worked hard at all the strenuous training Marut prepared for him, but he secretly learned to read. He was very musical, a gift Marut thought wasted on a future soldier. It was lucky she did not know the hours he spent in our house, playing any instrument he could lay his hands on. He composed tunes, too, and put words to them. There was one very special song he used to sing, a lullaby, the rhythm of which haunts me still. "Where did you learn that?" I asked him. A slightly puzzled look came over his face. "A woman taught it to me. A woman with fair hair, like mine." "Was she your nurse?" Gamal hesitated. "I don't know," he said. I knew by his air of embarrassment that there was something mysterious about the song that he himself could not explain. Even apart from her treatment of Gamal, I never liked Marut. She always seemed to be kind to me, drawing me to her and kissing me, stroking my hair, using flattering words, bringing me presents from her frequent travels. But there was something about her that made me uneasy. Her words sounded false, and I felt that, though she claimed to love me, actually she didn't really like me at all. Once, when Gamal and I were about 5, we were alone with her in her apartment, having a quarrel over a toy. A wooden bird with moving wings. We shouted at each other and grabbed the bird back and forth between us. Suddenly, Marut leaned over, smacked me, snatched the toy from my grasp, and gave it to Gamal. The look she gave me was one of pure hatred, and I shrank back from her. I never trusted her after that. Soon I realized that my mother's lips tightened whenever Marut's name was mentioned, and that she never entertained a Marut except on official occasions, when her absence would have been noticed. Once, when Aunt Marut was away on one of her journeys, and Gamal was happily living in our house, I said to my mother, "Wouldn't it be nice if Aunt Marut never came back?" My mother laughed in a slightly rebuking way, as grown-ups often do when they agree with you, but don't want you to know it, and I could see that she felt just as I did, and that, like me and Aerith, she enjoyed spoiling Gamal as if to counteract Marut's influence. I spent a lot of time with my mother just then. Usually she was a woman who liked her own company, and she would sit contentedly for hours in her chamber, reading or sewing. Yet, when I wandered in from playing or riding my pony, she seemed pleased to see me, and we had long conversations together. In one of these conversations, I was surprised to discover that Marut, just like Uni, was my godmother. I tried to get Erlaine to discuss it, but she would say nothing except, "She is your father's sister." But her face was cold and her lips disapproving, and I guessed that the choice had not pleased her. "Why is Marut so nasty to Gamal?" I asked. "She makes him sleep in that cold room without proper blankets." "She wants to make him a great warrior," Erlaine replied. "I can't be a great warrior," I said. "No," she said, her eyes meeting mine. "You will need other powers." "What other powers?" "It is too soon to say." "If I had a brother, would he rule the kingdom after father?" "Yes," said my father, expressionless. "But if I don't have a brother?" "That would depend," she said, "on your power. The strength of the warrior is not the only kind." I went out to the ditch to think things over, and crouching against the grassy rampart, I wondered whether I had any power. I didn't feel as if I did, although I had used special powers to find that water. I had not set out to use them, however. It had simply happened when I wasn't thinking about it. I couldn't see how that would be much use in running a kingdom. And I could well imagine that if my mother did not bear a son, a powerful knight or a distant cousin might take the kingdom over, or Gamal. Just as his name occurred to me, a pebble struck me lightly on the head. A shout from above, and Gamal slithered down the bank beside me and landed with a bump on the bottom. It was as if thinking about him had brought him here. "Gamal!" "Mother's away, and I've got the afternoon free from swordplay. Let's go someplace." The two of us saddled our ponies and rode away, galloping over the moorland towards the distant sea. We made for a little valley, quite deserted, where the horses moved down trails between the trees toward a stream that led to the sea. When we reached the sandy beach, we threw off our clothes and plunged into the waves. Afterwards, sunning ourselves on the rocks, we played a game of seeing how long we could sit on one rock before the incoming tide engulfed us. We had the sense to know that if we waited too long, it would be really dangerous, but it was fascinating to see how long the sea took, making occasional bold sallies farther up the beach and then, as if preparing to trick us, not moving in our direction for a long, long time. "Will you become a Regulus of Cornwall when my father dies?" I asked Gamal bluntly. "Is that what Marut wants?" Gamal reddened. "It's what she wants. It doesn't mean it will happen." Then he added, "Your mother may have a son." "And if she doesn't?" Gamal shrugged. I considered for a bit, then remembered my mother's words. "The strength of the warrior is not the only kind," I repeated. "There are other kinds of power. I intend to learn what they are, and, as my father's daughter, rule after him." Gamal gave me a long, thoughtful glance. "I hope you do," he said. "As you know, I want to be a musician, not a ruler, though Mother would never let me." He stood up as if the game with the tie no longer interested him. "If you have the power to rule, and do it rightly, you will have my allegiance and my fealty," he said. "I would be glad to serve you." He pretended to take an imaginary cap off his head and swept a low bow to me. Then he climbed on his horse and rode away. I was surprised and touched by his response, by the love and faithfulness in his gray eyes, and by the fact that he had not mocked my claims to power. But I suddenly felt very weak and frightened. It was around that period that I began to dream, a dream that always had the same ingredients, except that each time the action proceeded a little further, and each time I woke up with a worrying sense that there was something I should do about the dream, only I could not imagine what it was. This feeling was slight at first, but grew stronger and stronger. The first part of the dream was tranquil and beautiful. There was a hazel tree with a full moon hanging in the sky, just beyond it, which lit its leaves and branches until they shone like jewels. This passed into a sense of flying in the night, a night sky rich with stars. Up to this point, the dream was delightful. But then suddenly, I was in a dark tunnel. I was not alone. I was running, terror-stricken with some other people, and there was a deafening sound in our ears that I could not identify. Was it thunder? As if the noise were not bad enough, there was a most peculiar smell, as of a wild beast, which inspired a sense of fear. At my mother's suggestion, I discussed this dream with one of our astrologers, but though my people thought dreams were very important, he seemed unwilling to ponder what it might mean. I think he was afraid that he might have to prophesy a terrible accident, or even worse, and he preferred not to think about it. So I struggled to think about it all by myself. But apart from remembering that the hazel tree was the wood we had used to find water on the day the twig turned into a snake, I could make nothing of it. As I grew older, I spent less time with Aerith and more with my tutors and my mother. I liked learning most of the time. I had the best of teachers. I had long outstripped Gamal, who spent most of his day in the mock battles on the green enclosure. Who spent most of his day in mock battles on the green enclosure, where the men shot their arrows and wrestled in practice with their weapons. Only in music, even though his fingers were tired and wrenched from his day's exercise, could he outshine me. He played beautifully upon the harp and flute, and he could sing well too, in a pure angelic treble. Most afternoons, sweaty, tired, hungry, he would come to see me after a day of wrestling or riding or swordplay. I too had finished my day's work, writing, translating, listening to my father giving judgment on a difficult case. Aerith would bring both of us scented water in which to wash, and we would change our clothes. Then we ate some fruit or sweetmeats, and settled down to play. Even Meerut did not forbid this. On wet days we played Finchnell, or made music. On fine days we walked or rode, coming home in the twilight to share a stew or a roasted bird in front of the fire. Together we played with Moon, who liked to walk up our arms and sit on our shoulders. He had a way of apparently listening to our conversations, his head on one side, a thoughtful, judicial expression on his face that was irresistibly funny. Gamal often addressed questions to him, then replied in a pretend owl voice. "Isn't Nanak in a bad temper today, Moon?" Gamal would ask, and then reply owlishly to himself, "I don't know what you're complaining about. I have to put up with her all the time." Gamal and I had begun to share a secret. When day by day he returned from his labors as an apprentice soldier, he was often cut or bruised. He would have a long scratch on his face, a nasty graze on his leg, a pulled shoulder, a twisted ankle. To begin with, I would bathe these injuries for him, put ointment on them, bandage them, until he began to notice something strange. The injuries began to grow better as soon as I looked at them or touched them, and often before I had even reached for the bandage. "Don't tell anyone," I begged him, suddenly shy at the discovery. "What is it that you do?" he asked me. That was the embarrassing part. I didn't do anything. I just looked at the sore place and touched it and did whatever was necessary to make it feel better. "I wonder what you couldn't heal," Gamal went on. A week later we had the chance to find out. He came in with his arm broken after a bout of wrestling in which he had slipped and fallen. His tutor stood at the door, waiting to take him to the bone setter, but Gamal insisted on coming to me first. Seeing his face twisted with pain and the protective way he held his arm, I put out a hand and touched him with the utmost gentleness. This time, because it was so important to make him better, I concentrated really hard on healing his broken arm. Nothing happened. We had discovered the limit of my power. I could manage cuts, scratches, and bruises, but anything else was beyond me. And that was the end of chapter 2. So we have one chapter left that I plan on doing today, and that's chapter 3, which seems to be about the same length as chapter 2. So we're almost done here for the day, guys. And anybody who has actually stuck with me from beginning to end, thank you. It's somewhat reassuring to look up and see that there's at least somebody here with me. So I appreciate that. And for those of you watching on the replay, hope you're having fun. Sorry for my awkwardness. Alright, so Juniper, chapter 3. Since the day when she had found me in the stable, Uni had not spoken to me, which I thought was odd behavior for a godmother. Perhaps twice a year I would see her at castle door, marching purposefully through the palace on her way to my father's apartments. I noticed that she would spend hours with him, but then scorn the feasting and the presents with which we regaled most of our visitors, and leave as simply as she came, setting off on the long walk to the mysterious place where she lived in the outlands. I had no idea what she and my father could talk about. One day, however, a change came. Aerith entered the room where I was practicing my calligraphy. I remember that I was gilding a letter A that had a tiny blue man sitting sideways on the crossbar and swinging his leg, and said, "King Mark wants to see you, right away." She turned sharply and went out. I sighed. I had been enjoying my work and was annoyed at being interrupted, but no one kept my father waiting. I suppose because that day changed my life, I can still remember the look of the writing, the brilliant autumn sky, and even the gown I wore, blue, with a belt worked in precious stones and silk. My father sat in the great chair that he used when he was meeting people, officially. On a smaller chair beside him, very upright, sat Uni, who did not greet or notice me. I sat on an even smaller chair, suddenly feeling insignificant and shy. "We have been talking," said my father, "Uni and I, about your future. As you know, it is the custom of this country to send a noble child away from home for a year or two to stay in another house as part of the child's education. It's usually boys who are sent, but in this case the circumstances are unusual. Uni, as your godmother, has proposed that, in, say, a year's time, we should send you to live with her for a while. She believes, and I agree with her, that she will have valuable lessons to teach you." The expression on my face must have betrayed my horror at the idea of living with Uni, because my father frowned sternly at me. I had forgotten that however startled I was, he expected me to show good manners. "Go away from here," I said. Oh, I apologize, I misread the context. "Go away from here," I said, "from Aerith and you and Mother and Gamal and everyone, to go and live in the outlands? You will come to no harm." I was so upset that I felt my lower lip begin to droop with the threat of tears. Uni spoke, but she was not in the least reassuring. "It is necessary," she said. "There are things you need to learn, things only I can teach you. I'm your godmother, and I claim the right to instruct you." "I don't want to go," I said sullenly, half under my breath. "For a year and a day. Uni went on as if I had not spoken. "That should do it. You will come to me in about a year. I shall not send for you. You will know when the moment comes. Come alone, on foot, with a few clothes. That should suffice." "Very well, then," said my father. "It's settled." I knew that this was the signal for me to leave, and unwillingly I got up to go. Uni followed me, and when we were outside the door, she turned to me with a rather wolfish smile, hissing through her teeth the one word, "Juniper," almost as if she were making a joke. Then she turned and walked away. I was deeply shaken by this encounter. I discussed it with Aerith, who was indignant at the suggestion that I should go anywhere without her, and I mentioned it to my mother, Elaine, who was sympathetic, but who, predictably, sided with my father. However, she shed a new light on the idea. "We have spoken of the power you may need one day," she said. "I think it is too soon to say whether you will have that or should use it, but Uni is one who has power. That is why we chose her for you as a godmother. She's quite right. You could learn from her." This made the whole idea seem a little better, but at the same time I dreaded leaving the places and the people I knew and going to live in the Outland. "What is Uni's house like?" I asked sulkily. "I don't know. I've never been there. I've heard that it is beside a great hill, a tor, near the sea, and I think she appoints herself a sort of guardian of the hill." This was comforting in a way. I liked the idea of living by the sea, but I was still puzzled. A hut? It hurt. I was still puzzled and hurt. I'm sorry. "You will send me to the Outland to stay at a house you have never seen. The Outland is dangerous. Everybody knows that. I might easily be killed by brigands or by our enemies. None of you seems to care, and Uni is so dirty and horrible." Quite apart from the dangers of the Outland, I could not understand why my parents trusted Uni so much. I did not like Uni, nor trust her. I was afraid of her rags and poverty. My mother hesitated. "Christians say that there is no magic, that the world is ruled by love. I cannot decide whether they are right. Our forebear author. Too many R's in one location. Our forebear Arthur was a Christian, yet believed in magic," she said. "This kingdom seems to be controlled by magic, good magic and bad magic. For those who choose the good magic, it is important to have strong allies who choose good magic too. Uni is your father's strongest ally. If you let her, she'll become your ally, and that might be important." Erling said all this very gravely, and though the words she used were simple, it was as if she were talking to a grown-up. Somehow, without really understanding, I knew that I would have to go to be Uni's pupil. I wondered when. Uni had said about it in about a year that I would know when the time came, but I could not imagine how. In any case, a year seemed a comfortably long time away. Autumn slipped into snowy winter, and little seemed to have changed in my life, except one thing. The dream of the hazel tree was coming more and more often. Always I was delighted by its beauty. It filled me with a sort of hunger that was also a kind of joy, the feeling that if I could find it, I would be supremely happy. Occasionally I woke up at this point, and there were tears of happiness on my cheeks. But far more often I was back again in the tunnel, running in terror from the dreadful fate that pursued me and my companions, and which was heralded by the intolerable noise and smell. I told Gamal about the conversation with Uni. He was so fascinated that he went right home and told Marut. Later he said that she was very angry about it. I could not understand why it would make Marut angry, but I was not in the least sorry that it did. I grew a lot in that year, and felt as if I came to understand many more things. I played the harp every day. I learned and sang many of the famous songs of my people. I studied the stars and learned astrological law. I read Latin and wrote what I believed was a beautiful script. More often my father took me into his council chamber when he was listening to a dispute, and afterward would ask me what I thought of his decision. I usually got bored in the middle of all the explanations, though, and went off into a daydream. I daydreamed a lot at that time. Sometimes I daydreamed that I was a beautiful woman who everybody adored. Sometimes that I was a brave soldier who was afraid of nothing. One day, something odd happened. as odd as the days when I felt the twig move in my hands. Sorry. It was a bright spring morning, and Gamal and I had run away, in my case, from lessons, and in Gamal's from the perpetual wearisome drilling of his life as a boy soldier. We were riding a long way from Castle Doran, the outland territory, which my father had forbidden us to. We were cantering in a wide grassy space with trees on one side of it. I knew from previous experience that a bit farther the ground rose steeply, passed into a narrow gully by a stream, with cliffs on both sides, and swung toward a narrow place where you could pass only one at a time, and then opened an estuary, and then opened toward an estuary and the sea. I suppose I was thinking about the place, anticipating it, when suddenly, with total clarity, I saw it in my mind's eye. On the far side of the narrow gorge was a camp, with ragged women and children and skinny horses grazing. But in the narrow place between the rocks, several men were crouched, holding weapons, clearly with the intention of killing or holding for ransom anyone who attempted to pass. So vivid was this picture that I had to look around me to make sure that I was not actually at the gorge. No, there was the spacious stretch of grass, the trees, and the lithe movement of our horses beneath us. But there we were, it seemed to me, heading fast toward danger. At once I told myself I was making up a story, and that I must order my thoughts. But then, as if from beside me, came a voice, very, very like the owlish voice in which Gamal imitated the moon. "Don't go. Don't go." On that day, as many others, I was carrying Moon asleep in my pocket. I slowed my horse, and though I knew the owl hated bright daylight, I pulled him out. Sorry. I'm sorry. Let's see. He fluffed his feathers, blinked crossly, and said again, I could see his beak moving, "Don't go. Don't go." "You can talk, Moon?" I said. "Of course," he replied wearily, "but now I want to go back to sleep." I shouted to Gamal to stop, reined in my horse, and slipped to the ground. Gamal rode back to me, puzzled. He was even more puzzled when I told him. "You just made that up," he said. "Perhaps I did, I'm not sure, but I'm quite certain that if we ride through the gorge, we will be in danger." Gamal chewed thoughtfully on a piece of grass. "In that case, how about climbing the path up above the gorge? You remember the one, looking down on the camp, just to see?" I did not want to appear cowardly, so I swallowed my longing to turn and go home, and set off with him, on foot, along the path through the trees. There was something very reassuring about having an adventure with Gamal. He had such a sensible, cheerful air as he stalked along in front of me, once or twice stopping to listen carefully. As we approached the head of the gorge, we became very quiet indeed. I knew that Gamal must have really have believed what I told him. Then we were in sight of the place where the gorge, that huge split in the surface of the earth, began. We stole lightly across to the rock that overlooked the gorge and stared down. All was just as I had seen it. I was about to gloat over this when I glanced to one side. 100 paces away, 2 robber scouts were staring intently at us and beginning to move in our direction. "Gamal," I hissed, "run! Run!" Both of us turned back to the woods and ran, fleet of foot, driven by the sound of the robbers crashing through the undergrowth behind us. Our only hope was the 2 horses tethered where we had left them. In spite of our start, the robbers were not far behind, and when we leaped into our saddles and urged our horses away, catching our panic, they took off at full speed, manes and tails flowing in the wind. I looked around once, and saw one of the robbers about to fit an arrow into his bow. I did not look again. After that, Gamal was inclined to be respectful of my gifts, but to wonder why I had foreseen the robbers in the gorge, but did not know about the robber scouts. I couldn't tell him. "Can all women do magic?" he asked me. "I don't think so," I replied. "Mayroot can, you know," he said. "What kind?" "I'm not sure. She won't talk about it. It's just that I see her books and parchments. There's a terrifying picture in one of them, and sometimes she mixes potions." He sounded unhappy. "What sort of picture?" I was intrigued. "There was someone drinking something and falling asleep," Gamal spoke, unwillingly. "Then they were in a coffin, buried in the ground, but alive, awake, fighting to get out. It gave me nightmares for weeks." "You think people You think Meerut would do a thing like that to her enemies? I asked, frightened. I don't know, Gamal said wretchedly. I don't really understand magic, I said. That's why I'm going to unis, I suppose. Do you want to go? I don't know. Somehow, that did me feel that I needed to be taught whatever it was Uni knew. Perhaps I thought she could teach me really effective magic, and I would be able to use it to make people do anything I wanted them to do. That was a pleasing thought. In any case, I felt myself moving inevitably toward her, even though I didn't like her very much. It was very odd. So how is it, Gamal persisted, that if you can see into the future, you cannot beat me at Finchnell? You should be able to see my moves several turns ahead. I do beat you sometimes, I said indignantly, but I saw his point. There was something that I didn't make sense. There were some things that did not make sense. Now that I had discovered Moon could speak, I spent a lot of time talking to him. But to my disappointment, he did not utter another sound. He would gaze at me very intelligently with his head to one side and sit blinking with his amber eyes. But that was all. Please say something, Moon, I would beg. I know you can. He'd simply ruffle his feathers and blink at me with those astonishing eyes. One night, I dreamed of the hazel tree and the tunnel. This time, whatever was pursuing me was close at hand. I woke up after the dream, and the feeling of fear was very great, though it was gradually succeeded by the longing for the hazel tree. I knew that something had to change, but I could not imagine what it might be. And that was it. That was the end of chapter 4. So we are going to call it a day there. I will pick up. I'm going to try for next week. Same time, same date, Wednesday, 1:30. But it will really depend on how life is going at that point. So if I don't do it next Wednesday, I will do it the following Wednesday. I'm pretty much going to always try to stick to Wednesdays, so that way I have, worst case scenario, if I haven't come up with a new topic for my Literate AF group, I have something to talk about, because I go live in Literate AF on Facebook on Thursday evenings. So that was the first 3 chapters of Juniper by Monica Furlong. We are going to be reading our way through all 25 chapters of this, and then we'll follow it with Wise Child, also by Monica Furlong. And the third in the series, Coleman. So that's where we are at. Okay. Sorry. That was my signal to remind me to wrap it up. So thank you for joining me, for all those who stuck around. And I will be wrapping this up and saving it, and then I will be posting it to my YouTube. Once the video is posted to YouTube and is fully up and running, I will pin a comment with the link to a video on here. From what I see, live videos do not automatically get added to your profile, so I will make a quick blurb with the link. Anyway, have a great day, have a great week, and we'll see you next time.